Who really destroyed Byzantium? What if I told you? The Byzantine Empire didn't crumble in a single battle. Its demise wasn't the work of one enemy, one betrayal, or one catastrophic event. Instead, its death was a slow-motion collapse that took centuries to unfold. And some of its most devastating wounds were self-inflicted. Because the truth is, Byzantium was betrayed. By allies who twisted their promises, by pride that refused to adapt, and ultimately by an empire that stopped believing in itself. This is the real story of how a 1,000-year empire quietly collapsed. A beacon in the darkness. For over a millennium, Byzantium was nothing short of miraculous. Born in 330 AD, when Emperor Constantine refounded the city of Byzantium as his new capital, Christopolis, later known as Constantinople, it became the beating heart of Eastern Rome. While the Western Empire fractured under the weight of barbarian invasions, economic decline, and internal strife, Byzantium stood firm. Its triple-layered walls were the strongest fortifications of the medieval world. Its harbor thrived with merchant ships from Venice, Alexandria, and beyond. Its scholars preserved the works of Plato and Aristotle. Its jurists codified Roman law in Justinian's celebrated digest, and its church shaped Christian worship across 2 continents. Byzantium wasn't just surviving, it was shaping the future. It was the cultural bridge between East and West, the economic engine of the Mediterranean, and the political linchpin of Christendom. But even the greatest light can dim when its fuel runs out. Chapter 1. Internal decay. Let's start with the first slow-burn wound, internal rot. Over the centuries, court rituals became more elaborate, taxes grew heavier, and bureaucracy choked initiative. Empires live or die by leadership, and too often, Byzantium's emperors were puppets of powerful courtiers or military factions. Some sovereigns, like the pious but indecisive Michael III, fell under the sway of eunuchs and palace intrigue. Others, like the ruthless Basil II, flew too close to the sun with mass executions of rival nobles that destabilized the aristocracy. Generals who should have guarded the eastern frontier squabbled over promotions and titles. Provincial governors skimmed taxes to fill their own coffers. Armies went unpaid, and mercenaries switched sides for higher bids. As the state fractured from within, its capacity to repel external threats ebbed away. Religious disputes only made matters worse. In the 5th and 6th centuries, the empire was torn apart by arguments over Christ's nature, monophysitism versus Chalcedonian orthodoxy, leading to long-running schisms with Egypt and Syria. Icons became a battlefield under Constantine V's iconoclasm, driving a wedge between icon worshippers and zealots. Later, theological agitation over heresies like Paulicianism and Bogomilism spawned rebellions in Asia Minor, diverting troops from pressing dangers. Instead of building alliances, Byzantium spent centuries fighting itself. And when you're bleeding internally, even a small external cut can be fatal. Chapter 2. The Fourth Crusade's Betrayal. If internal decay was poison, the Fourth Crusade was the knife. In 1202, Pope Innocent III preached a new holy war to reclaim Jerusalem. Knights from across Europe, French, Italian, and German, answered the call, gathering to sail toward the Levant. But disaster loomed before they even left Venice. Unable to pay their Venetian transport fees, Crusader leaders agreed to assist Doge Enrico Dandolo in seizing the city of Zara, modern Zadar, as collateral. Pope Innocent III excommunicated them, but the Crusaders pressed on. When they finally refocused on Constantinople in 1203, it wasn't to liberate the Holy Sepulchre. It was to enthrone a Byzantine prince, Alexios IV Angelos, who promised them vast riches in exchange for military aid against his uncle, Emperor Alexios III. The promise proved empty. When the Crusaders landed in April 1204, they found a city ill-prepared, its defenses weakened by years of neglect and internal conflict. What followed was a sack so brutal it reverberates through history. Churches were stripped of gold and silver, priceless mosaics shattered under swords, ancient manuscripts burned or looted, nuns and clergy were beaten, and common citizens were slaughtered in the streets. The Crusaders transformed Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom, into a makeshift stable. For 57 years, Latin Crusader rulers held Constantinople as their capital. The restored Byzantine Empire that returned in 1261 under Michael VIII, Palaeologus, found itself a shadow state. The city was depopulated, its economy in tatters, its trade networks usurped by Venetian and Genoese merchants who controlled the Black Sea and Aegean routes. Chapter 3. A World Transformed. When Byzantium reclaimed Constantinople, the empire's heart stopped beating the same way. Territories once extending across Thrace, Anatolia, and the Levant had been lost. Cyprus, Crete, the Aegean Islands, and much of Anatolia were now under Latin, Turkish, or Venetian control. The silk trade, once a crown jewel in Byzantine commerce, moved to Italian city-states. The tax revenues that sustained defensive walls vanished. Agricultural lands fell into disuse. Desperate, Byzantine emperors sent envoys westward, begging for aid from the papacy and European kings. Yet each offer came with a price: submission to Rome. To accept meant betraying centuries of Orthodox tradition and church autonomy. Better to die defending orthodoxy than save the empire with a treasonous signature. So, they stood alone. Chapter 4. The Ottoman Hammer. Meanwhile, in Anatolia, a new power was rising. Turkish beyliks coalesced under the leadership of Osman I, founding the Ottoman dynasty. Under his successors, Orhan, Murad I, and Bayezid I, the Ottomans cemented control of northwestern Anatolia and the Balkans. They learned Byzantine military art, adopted its siege techniques, and trained under its engineers. They even hired former Byzantine soldiers. By the early 15th century, they had mastered artillery, cannons that could batter the massive Theodosian walls. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II, only 21 years old but brimming with ambition, assembled an army of 80,000 to 100,000 men. He deployed the massive Basilica cannon, capable of firing 600-pound stone balls at 100-meter range. Inside Constantinople, a garrison of roughly 7,000 defenders, soldiers, city guards, and volunteers prepared for the siege. Many were foreigners: Genoese mercenaries, Catalan archers, and a handful of knights from Western Europe. For 53 days, the defenders repelled wave after wave of Ottoman assaults. They patched breaches by hand, manned the towers until they collapsed, and rode out on night raids to destroy siege engines. Yet gunpowder's might proved inexorable. On May 29, 1453, the Ottomans finally burst through a weakened section of wall. Constantinople fell. The city's fall was brutal and swift. Blood flowed in the streets, churches were looted, and survivors were dispersed across the Ottoman realm. Sultan Mehmed took up residence in the imperial palace, declaring himself Caesar of Rome, the heir to both the Roman and Byzantine imperial traditions. Epilogue: betrayed by time. But let us not mistake 29th May 1453 for Byzantium's true death. That date marks the final chapter, not the story's beginning. The empire had been bleeding for centuries, its institutions hollowed by corruption, its people divided by dogma, its capital sacked by those who vowed to defend it. It was betrayed by crusaders who came under the banner of Christ, betrayed by Western powers who refused to help unless Byzantium forsook its faith, and betrayed by an empire too proud to reform its government, too fractured to unite its people, and too rigid to adapt to changing ways of warfare. Byzantium didn't die with a single trumpet blast. It died in silence through decades of missed opportunities, misplaced loyalties, and unheeded warnings. So, who really destroyed Byzantium? Was it the Ottoman cannons that shattered its walls? The Fourth Crusade that gutted its soul? Or the centuries of internal decay that left it vulnerable to every blow? History seldom offers simple answers, but Byzantium's lesson is clear. Even the greatest empires can vanish, not solely by the swords of enemies, but by the silence of their own errors. What do you think? Comment below with your perspective, and if you hunger for more untold truths, subscribe and join us. Because the fall of an empire is never a story of one enemy. It's a cautionary tale of many.